people who were not we are recording, and so the people who are not able to be here in real time are able to access the recording. So if you don't want to be on the recording, then you can just keep yourself without camera and without sound. But our speakers have graciously allowed us to record this, so thank you for that. So again, I'm Laura Baumgartner, and I'll be the MC for tonight. I'm part of the Aurora Reimagined Coalition Steering Committee that has planned this meeting and has been engaging with all of you for the last few years as we are trying to encourage the city and the county and the state to continue their work and really advocate for the possibility that the Aurora corridor could be a corridor that meets the needs of the 21st century and is designed for the people that use it, who live there, who work there, who travel through there, and that it really becomes a place that people want to be. So that is a little bit about us. We'll be talking a little bit more about the coalition in a few minutes, but Tom, I think our next slide will kind of describe what we're going to be doing tonight. So we'll talk a little about what the coalition is. Probably many of you have heard of the coalition before, so we'll keep that part brief. We really want to make a lot of space for our guest speaker, Kirk Hovenkotter. We'll talk a little bit more about Kirk when we get there, but that will be the main event for tonight. And then after Kirk's comments, we will have some updates about where the Aurora Avenue project is right now, what the North Aurora Planning Study is, and the excuse me, the project that the mayor keeps talking about, Northern Lights, and what we know or don't know so much about Northern Lights. So we'll at the very end then have time for questions from you, and we'll ask you to keep those questions in the chat, and so that we can address them to the person that is most likely to have an answer for you. But that's the overview of our evening. We'll be here until about 8:30. And so I encourage you to be thinking about your questions and jot them down as we go so that we can get to them at the end. All right, Tom, I think we're ready for the next slide.
All right. Well, thank you, Laura, and thank you to everyone who's here tonight on St. Patrick's Day, taking time out of your Monday evening to talk about Aurora. I'll tell you a little bit about who we are as a coalition and a little bit about the history and what's happening on Aurora very briefly, what's been happening over the past few years. To start, the Aurora Reimagined Coalition is all volunteer. Everyone you see talking on behalf of the coalition, organizing events, they're all volunteers, neighbors just like you and I. We're a grassroots organization. We're not even a 501c3. We have no budget at all. We're just organized and committed to seeing change along Aurora. We formed in 2021, and we are comprised of both community members, businesses, community organizations, and key individuals that live and work and travel along Aurora. A little bit about why we formed the coalition. Myself and Lee Brush here on the screen came together in 2021. Lee actually had the idea for forming a coalition focused on Aurora specifically back in 2020. You may remember I think it was in 2020, there was a really horrific car crash along Aurora in the Fremont neighborhood where a woman impaired under the influence drove up onto the sidewalk and struck two people who were walking. They're actually tourists in town just for the weekend. Killed both, and it's horrific and tragic, and could have been avoided if speed limits were a little bit, or if the speed of the street were lower. So after that, we came together, decided to focus on improving Aurora. And a couple of reasons why are here visually represented. I'm going to go through a couple more slides to show you, but you can see here on the right side, the Vision Zero High Injury Network. All those red lines on the map are places where people are consistently struck and killed, both driving, walking, and biking in the city of Seattle. And it gets darker the further up Aurora you go, and that's the places where more people are walking and biking across Aurora. So it's no coincidence that people are struck and killed in the places where there's more people who live in the city. We also see that there's urban heat island effect in North Seattle, and it's pronounced along Aurora across the entire corridor. Again, no surprise, it's a lot of concrete and a lot of cars moving quickly, and not a lot of shade. And then there's also this map here on the right side of the screen. There's a vulnerability for displacement. As the city grows, there's more and more people moving in and housing becomes imperative. The cost of housing keeps going up, and you can see along the Aurora corridor, there's significant vulnerability for displacement. So all of these issues come together to really bring us to why we formed in the first place, and that is our purpose to bring together all of the different organizations, city agencies, county agencies, even up at the state level, bring together all of the stakeholders and the decision makers so that we can transform Aurora into a working corridor that achieves the goals that we need for the 21st century. On the screen are our vision, the 4 items in our vision, which is that we put people first. There's people that live and work along Aurora. We want to see that they are prioritized. And that means both people who are driving a car, but also people who are walking, rolling in a wheelchair or a stroller, biking, taking transit, waiting at a bus stop, all different types of people. We want to make sure that people are prioritized along Aurora. We want to see businesses that are supported and thriving and can continue as long as they're able to on Aurora. We don't want to see displacement of people living on Aurora, nor businesses that work on Aurora. And we want to foster diverse communities, and we want to make sure that those communities are able to exist now and into the future for the next 100 years. So looking ahead to climate change and the impacts that we're seeing already from heat emergencies, heat waves, and also from flooding and other things that affect the built environment along Aurora. We started this in 2021. It's been a few years now, but from the very beginning, we called out that this is a long process, that it's a long corridor. There's a lot of different jurisdictions and details that go into all the planning. And we know this takes a while. The Seattle process is long and arduous, so we're in it for the long haul. You can see this is a working draft of a timeline we developed years ago. We're about here right now, so not even halfway on this timeline, and we expect more to happen. But there's a couple of things that have already taken shape, which is great. We're seeing some successes, and there's a lot more to do. So we are committed to seeing it through to the end. One of the main things, the main organizing project that brought us together was the Aurora Avenue project that's still ongoing. We'll talk a little bit about that, but some things to note about the Aurora Avenue project. And you can see here it's led by SDOT, Department of Transportation, broken up into different segments along Aurora. And there's other agencies involved in this project. King County Metro, obviously Washington Department of Transportation, who owns the highway itself, State Route 99. And also Seattle Public Utilities is involved very much in this project because there's a lot of drainage issues along Aurora that they want to deal with. And Seattle City Light is following very closely what happens because they would also like the opportunity to update their utilities along Aurora if and when it becomes possible. And there's a couple other projects that are happening or have happened in conjunction with the Aurora Avenue project. The Aurora Licton Springs Drainage System Analysis, I mentioned Seattle Public Utilities. They have a specific project in the Licton Springs neighborhood, but they're looking at the entire corridor. There was a tree preservation sidewalk upgrade project a couple years ago that SDOT completed, preserving as many trees as they could along Aurora. The Green Lake Outer Loop project, you may know, is completed. It's beautiful, and that was part of this Aurora advocacy effort. There's a home zone project led by SDOT, and there's the North Aurora Community Planning Study, which we will be talking about a little later on, led by the Office of Planning and Community Development. So I bring all this up and mention it briefly just because I wanted to call out just how broad and far-reaching all of this Aurora work is. It really is corridor-wide change, and it's holistic transformation. And I want to call out some of the key words we're using. You'll hear people with the Aurora Reimagined Coalition volunteers constantly talk about the Aurora corridor and not the Aurora roadway, not Aurora Avenue itself, but the corridor. And that's because we really do believe that the Aurora Avenue corridor extends beyond the 90 to 120 foot right-of-way that is the road itself. It really encompasses the neighborhoods on both sides of the highway. So it's hard to say exactly how big the Aurora corridor is, but it is more than just the roadway. It's more than just roadway safety. We are seeking out holistic transformation, and we are really looking at transforming the entire Aurora corridor from the tunnel to the edge of the highway, or to the edge of the city. That's a very, very brief overview of the coalition, and I'll turn it back to Laura to introduce our guest speaker now.
Thanks, Tom. That's great. Hopefully, that gives you a little bit of context about what we're talking about and how big the projects are and what the coalition has been up to in the last couple of years. So, tonight, like I was saying before, we have a guest speaker that we're very excited about. There are several transportation related bills going through the state legislature right now. And so, Kirk Hovenkotter has, Kirk, I'm probably not saying your last name correctly. I apologize for that. But we've invited Kirk to come and talk to us specifically about one of the pieces of legislation that is before the state legislature and to help us to understand how transportation affects all of us and the entire corridor as well. So, Kirk, thank you for being here and take it away, please.
Laura, thanks for that really kind introduction. And Tom, thank you so much for setting the table for today's conversation. I'm so excited to talk to the Aurora Reimagined Coalition. You all are an inspiration of the amount of work and change that you all have already created on this corridor. So thank you so much for having me tonight. Uh, like Laura said, I'm Kirk Hovenkotter. I'm the Executive Director of Transportation Choices Coalition. And if you give me one moment, I'm going to share my screen to bring up some slides and give a quick little introduction about Transportation Choice Coalition and share more about our major initiative for this year, what we're calling our Megaproject for Safety. So once again, thank you so much for having me. If you don't know who Transportation Choices Coalition is, we are Washington State's nonprofit advocate for safe, sustainable, and equitable transportation. For over 32 years, we have been a coalition of business, labor, transit agencies, transit riders, and elected leaders, all beating the drum for more investments in transit and safe walks to transit. We do a lot of our work in the legislature, fighting for more funding for transit. We also organize transit riders across the state, usually to advocate for more funding in their communities for transit or to push back against board members in their communities who are trying to cut their own transit service. And we're most known for our work on winning ballot measure campaigns. And I want to thank the Aurora Reimagined Coalition so much for their support last year of the Keep Seattle Moving campaign to pass the Seattle Transportation Levy. And your support on knocking doors, calling voters, and making sure that the $30 million that was included in this levy for fixing Aurora and adding on to the investments that have already been made passed. And thanks to your energy and efforts, this levy passed with over 66% of the vote, meaning that an additional 30 million will be invested in Aurora in the work that you all have led and inspired. And one, it was thrilling to be a part of this campaign, but Transportation Choices Coalition is most known for our ballot measures that expanded light rail in 2016 and 2008 across the region. And it gives me goosebumps today to be in this role as these lines open across the region. And it was that campaign in 2008, the Mass Transit Now campaign, that gave me my start in this field. I got to wear a cardboard light rail vehicle costume on UW campus and register students to vote and vote yes on the Mass Transit Now campaign. And it's just so exciting to see these lines open. So our focus is really on expanding transit across the state. But we all know that everyone's transit trip starts at their front door. It starts on the sidewalks getting to your bus stop or your train station. And we also know that as Tom pointed out, that we're facing a traffic safety crisis in our communities across Washington State. In 2023, we had more people who were killed or seriously injured on our streets than since 1990. And every one of those is a tragedy. But we know where these collisions or we know where the most dangerous roadways are in our communities. These are typically our main street highways. These are roads like Aurora. These are roads like Division in Spokane, Pacific Avenue in Tacoma. These are state-owned roadways that were built to connect communities, but as our communities grew alongside them with more residences and businesses, they became some of the busiest roadways in our state. These are places that many people call home that have businesses, and they're also some of the busiest transit corridors in our state. But they're also where 47% of the people who were killed walking in our state occur. They occur on state-owned roadways. And specifically on Main Street highways, you're twice as likely as to be involved in a frequent crash on one of these roadways than on a state-owned freeway or a state-owned rural roadway. We know that these are the places where we need to invest our dollars and fix these roadways. And we also know that these roadways are where so many communities across our state are adding more homes. I can likely tell you that 100% of the comp plans that have been passed in the last few years upzone roadways along the state-owned Main Street highways in their communities. And we know that with more people along these roadways, with more transit riders, we need to make these roadways safer. And we also need to make them places that residents that live there today and future residents can be proud of. These communities deserve great roadways. Licton Springs, Bitter Lake, Fremont, Green Lake, all of these communities deserve an Aurora that is one they can be proud to call their main street of their community. But luckily, we know how to fix these roadways. We know how to make them safe. It's adding sidewalks. It's adding more crosswalks. It's adding median refuge islands that make it easier for people to cross. It's narrowing lane widths to slow down traffic. And we can benefit transit along these roadways by building bus lanes that operate 24/7 and also build better bus stops that give people a comfortable place to wait for transit. And we know that our state and these roadways, these Main Street highways, it's not just a west of the mountain thing. These roadways are in communities across the state. They're on both sides of the mountains. They're in Republican communities and Democratic communities. And I think almost you all know Aurora so well, but when I go and talk about this mega project for safety concept with other communities, almost everyone knows which are these roadways in their communities. They're the busy roadways. It's 101 through Port Angeles. It's Highway 2 through Monroe. It's Wheaton Way through East Bremerton. These are these roadways that just really suck. They're uncomfortable to be on, and they're owned and maintained by the state. And we know that when our state puts its mind, money, and might to an idea, it can do big things. We can build mega projects for floating bridges. The 520 project was a decades-long commitment of billions of dollars to address a transportation need that was requested by East Side legislators. We know that our state can do mega projects for freight, like the Puget Sound Gateway project, expanding Freeway 509 down in South King County and connecting 167 to the Port of Tacoma. That's another commitment of billions of dollars over decades. We want to see a mega project for safety. We want to see a mega project that dedicates billions of dollars over decades to invest in these roadways that we know are dangerous, that we know deserve to be better. And we want to use the same commitment that we're bringing to freight, to floating bridges, to these roadways. And so this is what we're asking for in the state legislature. And this is something that's not just an idea that we have. We know that the Seattle Times has covered the pedestrian safety crisis that we've had and really identified this as something we need to address. We know that former Transportation Secretary Roger Millar also saw this and called for $150 million a year investment into these roadways, which he lovingly called stroads. And we know that you all have shown how this can work. We were so proud to be a part of the coalition that helped pass the Move Ahead Washington Transportation Package in 2022, which included a $50 million investment in Aurora that you all won. And we were thrilled to be able to get an additional $30 million in the Seattle Transportation Levy to help support that. But we don't want that to be a one-off. We want communities across the state to be able to benefit from this investment. And it's so exciting that you all have shown how this can work. But not every community has the staff that the city of Seattle has. So we want WashDOT that owns and maintains these roadways to step up. And we want the legislature to allocate the money for WashDOT to be able to design these roadways and apply the lessons that we've learned from the work here in Aurora to those communities. And these are big projects. These are projects that put our labor partners to work. They put our agencies to work. They put our design firms to work. And these are big investments that are going to keep people working across Washington. And that is a big deal. And we know we need to act with urgency. We know that 2024 is also going to be a year with a significant number of people who were killed or seriously injured on our roadways. And we also know that we need to act quickly to make these roadways better. So we want to see the legislature in this legislative session make a commitment and dedicate $1.5 billion over 10 years to this investment. We've been down in Olympia calling for this. I was honored to be invited by State Senator Marco Lias to present on this idea for a mega project for safety, really make the case for it. And we're really waiting with bated breath to see in the budgets that come out on Monday on the 24th, or likely will come out on the 24th, to see if this investment is included in it. We know that the legislature is likely going to be looking at potentially a no revenue budget and maybe a revenue budget. So our ask for you all is to first visit our website. Check out transportationchoicescoalition.org/safety, where we have a one-pager that describes more about this mega project for safety. And there's also a link there where you can sign up and state your support for a mega project for safety, but stay in touch. And that's especially important over these next 2 to 3 weeks as these budgets start to roll out. And we're going to want to make sure that if this investment is included, that they hear from people across the state that this investment is important to them. So I want to give Laura and Tom a huge thank you for inviting me here today to share more. And I'd be happy to nerd out with you all about this idea. But really, I want to end by saying thank you all for coming up with this vision for what we could do in Aurora. And that's allowed us to take this statewide and call for more investment in funds to help expand this vision. So thank you so much for being an incredible volunteer group. Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to talk with you more about it. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kirk. This is really great information and inspiring to think that what we have been hoping for on such a small scale can actually be applied statewide. So thank you for taking it that direction and really helping us to have a bigger vision. So we're going to turn to Carlo for a few minutes for some updates about the projects that have been happening along Aurora lately. And then we'll be having some time for Q&A. If you joined us after the first time I described this, we'll have you put your questions in the chat so that we can direct them to the people who can best answer them. So if you have questions for Tom or Kirk already, you're welcome to start typing them. And Carlo will also be able to take questions in just a few minutes. So Carlo, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what's been going on Aurora and what we're anticipating here for the next year, possibly further out. But last year, maybe I think early last year, MSDOT gave us an update on, or they ran a survey, I should say, of what do we want to see on Aurora as their kind of initial gathering of feedback phase. This isn't a design phase. It's purely just we're going to take feedback from the community and try to compile it in a way that helps us understand what the community's needs are for the roadway specifically. So they're finalizing, so to speak, their documentation on this sort of phase 1 of this. They have put out some initial findings from their feedback, or from the feedback they gathered during this phase. But going into the next year, they were anticipating to see a 10% design in the next 1 to 2 years. They're primarily taking the lead on this. WashDOT has kind of handed that off or given them the responsibility to come up with that design. They had I believe they had an FTA grant. I'm not sure what the status of that is, to be honest, considering what's going on in the federal government. So hopefully nothing's getting off track, but at this point, we have no idea. So one of the biggest kind of parts of this is they have broken these up into a few different segments. Within these segments, they're just areas of North or Aurora Avenue North, with some exclusions. What's not really shown here is there isn't this doesn't include the bridge, and it doesn't include the area between um, the Woodland Park. So um, there's still some things to kind of be worked out here, but each of these segments had sort of a design or an idea, so to speak, of what could be done with this, and asked for gathering of feedback. So our kind of message here and what we want to see as an overall vision is to look at this holistically. So immediately it kind of, as you start breaking it up like this, might be a little bit cause for concern. We'll kind of see, I guess, how the design phase goes over the next year, hopefully. But this is where they're moving forward currently, and they have their initial findings out, which you can pull from the Aurora Project website, which is aptly named just Aurora Avenue Project. Yeah, so special shout out to Greg Spots, who's no longer our director of SDOT. But some small changes that have seemed to bring a good amount of change, or kind of moving towards that larger vision of holistic change were implemented. So specifically the no turn on red signs you've probably seen throughout the city, Aurora got its fair share and treatment of. There are the plans for these seem to be to expand continually throughout the city. But we have seen improvements on Aurora and seen these deployed. I personally bike across Aurora. It's a little bit hit or miss whether people are actually paying attention to these, I would say, but seeing people, I guess any amount of people that are respecting the signs is better than what we had before. So we're getting some of these types of incremental upgrades throughout the corridor. There are some other things planned, some things that seem to have been delayed but are still kind of on the docket, related to like smaller upgrades plus some things that fit within Vision Zero. So Aurora Reimagined Coalition for a number of years has been advocating for some treatments up at 137th. We are now under the understanding that we'll get a traffic signal there. WashDOT approved the design. The construction agreement was designed or was signed, and they're just kind of awaiting for the actual materials to be delivered, like putting in the signal themselves and starting construction. So as the weather warms up, we are hoping to see that start to pick up. There are some other small things like no turn restrictions by putting in physical curbing. So one on 103rd Street has been noted where there's a lot of cut through traffic. 100th is another one that it will be getting some treatments. But basically things to try to discourage a lot of the cut through traffic from people going between I-5 and Aurora, and then making their way further west towards the Greenwood area, Ballard, etc. So there's a few of these still on the docket that are overdue. More things are kind of being implemented around, but we're starting to see this small kind of incremental movement that is building towards, let's make these small changes to see how this changes the things like traffic patterns, how they work towards Vision Zero goals, to start to give an idea of how this corridor can fundamentally change for the long term. Another exciting thing I would say is coming soon, hopefully, is the 24/7 bus lanes. If you've taken the E-line, which I believe is the most, has the highest ridership in the region, possibly the state. Aurora Avenue being, about 7 lanes across. 2 of those are bus lanes for certain hours of the day during peak commute times. The rest of the time, they're either a general purpose lane or some have parking down near Green Lake. These are going to be changed over to 24/7 bus lanes temporarily, according to SDOT, or at least what they have told us. This was intended to be done in anticipation of the Revive I-5 project that has been delayed until next year while the legislature goes through the budget and reallocates some funding due to our state's deficit. So hopefully we'll see these within the next year. We may see this delayed. We're not sure yet. We'll need confirmation from SDOT, but we've asked them to study these lanes as well to better understand how is traffic changing. It seems to be the primary concern with these changes is how will this affect the traffic? We kind of know already or can infer from other bus lanes that have been deployed through the city that are bus only and restricted to transit that this tends to have a positive effect, and we don't really see much as far as traffic getting worse. But we need the data to back up those assumptions. So we've asked them to study these as they are implemented, and hopefully we'll see them be changed into something more permanent. There's also the concern about, where do the loading zones go for freight traffic? So SDOT is, as they've told us, working on that and finding ways to accommodate for that as these changes are put into place. Yeah. This is the, I guess, biggest thing we'll probably see this year. Back in 2022, 23, I think it was 2023, this was indefinitely delayed. The budget was removed for this, but this is an OPCD study that is intended to, and is sort of standard operating procedure for any kind of redevelopment in the area, or in any sort of area, I guess, throughout the city. To understand how the community is going to develop over the next decade, the next 20 years, et cetera. Separate from the comp plan, but should be somewhat comprehensive when we consider how is the city intending to develop. So this goes beyond just the roadway. It is intended to encompass all of the sort of neighborhoods that that include Aurora or that are Aurora adjacent, to understand what the needs are of all of those communities, beyond just the businesses and people who live on this roadway. So again, this is separate from SDOT. This is the community planning component of this. So we spent some time and effort, as well as with community groups like Licton Springs Community Council, to get this funded again. In the budget for this year within the city, there were 2 OPCD positions that were added back in to kick this study back off. So another thing being undelayed, so to speak, for this project. The mayor recently announced his Northern Lights project, which seems to fall in line with this planning study. We have no information about it. I've heard from our city councilors that they also don't have information about the Northern Lights plan. So I would like to give you more info on it. We're still trying to figure that out or get that ourselves. But this project seems to be maybe the superseding or building on the North Aurora Planning Study. So we're hoping to get some more information in the next coming months, as the mayor announced that will be a priority for him. But this is, I guess, beyond just the things that Aurora needs. So, for example, in Licton Springs, and on this side of I-5, I guess, or the west side of I-5, between it and Aurora, there's needs for community centers in some of these neighborhoods, the Licton Springs, Aurora, Licton Urban Village area, and into kind of that Greenwood area, are lacking a community center. Per capita, there are fewer parks in this northern part of the city than similarly or comparably sized areas throughout the city. But overall, we have kind of a neglected business community, neglected area of people who live up here next to or near the roadway. And so this planning study is intended to encompass all of those things that the community needs to help work in conjunction with the SDOT project. Transportation tends to drive, pun not intended, the development of an area. And so we wanted to make sure, and it seems we're going to be making sure with this that the community develops along with the roadway, and that those sort of separate but complementary studies help to inform each other on how these or how this area should develop. So that's it for Aurora updates.
Thank you,
Laura?
Carly. Yeah, that's great. I hope it's clear. There's 4, maybe 5 projects all happening at once with multiple levels of government weighing in on them. And so thank you, Carlo, for trying to make that clear and show how all the various projects are weaving together, or in some cases not weaving together, but we'll continue to try to advocate for that and make it possible. So we have several people who have already placed questions in the chat. Thank you for those. If you have more questions, please go ahead and place them in the chat also, so that we can direct them and maybe even gather up like questions together. Our first question will go to you, Carlo, I think. There's a comment that some of those no turn on red signs maybe went up and quickly came back down. And so is there any information that we have about why that might have been, or if that is part of a plan, or if there might be more that are going to be coming down?
Not that I know of. Those signs should be staying up. If you're talking about one on Northgate, northbound, Northgate is east-west, I think. So maybe maybe at that intersection of 105th and Northgate. I haven't heard anything about them coming down. Occasionally something happens where a business complains or somebody complains and things mysteriously disappear. I don't know much else beyond that. I would, if you've seen it or if it's not there anymore, I would recommend putting in a find it, fix it for that. There's some gun violence going on in Aurora, and occasionally signs get shot. Maybe it was that. I don't know, but no official word that I've heard from the city about taking down any of those signs. I believe they're moving forward on deploying more of those throughout the city.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it sounds like it was at Aurora and Northgate, and Henry has offered to check in with SDOT about that. So that's great. Thank you, Henry. And I'm glad, Carla, that you were able to confirm that. That matches what I was thinking as well, that we haven't heard anything about them coming back down. So thanks for confirming that. So our next question is from Henry for Kirk about the budget constraints that we keep hearing about from the state, and specifically around the operating budget and how that might compare to a transportation budget. So Kirk, would you like to comment on what you're hearing at the state level in terms of budget constraints?
Yeah, absolutely. Henry, it's a great question and really at the top of everyone's mind right now who's working in Olympia. Really, to your point, it's less of a revenue challenge than it is an expense challenge. I think we're seeing ballooning cost increases on a lot of our freeway expansion projects. Here in Seattle, we saw that the Portage Bay Bridge lid and Portage Bay Bridge extension of 520 was $700 million over budget, which is a huge amount of money. And like transportation projects across the country, costs are going up and just going up, especially on these huge mega projects that we're seeing that are to build wider freeways and more freeway expansion. On the carbon auctions, we're seeing them really stay, they've bounced back, but it's staying about steady, closer to what's predicted. Gas tax revenues are declining a little bit more than projected, which is a good thing. So we know that likely our leaders in the transportation committee are looking at new revenue. And so we are hearing that there's potentially going to be a revenue budget and a non-revenue budget coming out. And so we're going to be paying attention closely to those as what are some of the new revenue options that are put on the table.
Thank you. Yeah, there's lots coming out in just the next few days and weeks, so we're going to be paying a lot of close attention to that. Appreciate that. So again, please feel free to put your questions in the chat, and we will get them addressed to the people who can best answer them. Kirk, I have another question for you. I hope it's okay. Do you, or can you share with us any success stories, either from around the state or even beyond Washington State, about roads? I know you mentioned a lot of them around Washington State that, in your words, I think direct quote was suck. But are there some that don't suck anymore or suck less than they used to because of the good work that you're doing, or others like you in other places?
Yeah. Well, I think we can look at an earlier version, or definitely room for improvement is on Aurora in Shoreline. Looking specifically at the phase 1 improvements, the city went on to a phase 2 and a phase 3 that just weren't really at the same level as the phase 1 improvements that are just right along the border. But it's great investments in better sidewalks. And if you notice some of the details along those investments, yes, the sidewalks exist. That's a big, big win and big change. But you'll notice as you walk along those that the sidewalks are level. They don't have the dips for driveways. And if you're in a wheelchair, my father's in a wheelchair, and you go along a roadway that has driveways like that, it's so infuriating and hard to have to go up and down a slope every other driveway. And so the design there is really strong. I think we also do see some really good examples of people doing good designs on 82nd in Portland. I think there's some really strong case examples there. I also think you can look at um, roadways in Vancouver, especially along with some of their major transit corridors. They're great examples for us. But I'd hazard to say one that's a little bit controversial, but look just here in Seattle. Look at Alaska Way down where the new waterfront has been built. This is a state-owned roadway that now has a brand new bike lane on it. It has a new median islands to make crossings safer. It has transit lanes. It has a planted median. While should that roadway be right on our waterfront, there's a lot of questions to ask there. But when you look at some of our major Main Street highways across the state, some of those investments that we did on the waterfront on a state-owned roadway are a good model for some of these other places. And if we can do that on the state-owned roadway there on the waterfront, if we can bring those investments to some of these other communities, that I think would be a win for these roadways.
Can I jump in, Laura, and
Absolutely.
add to that answer maybe, and also ask my own question of Kirk, if I may? Thanks, Kirk, and those are great examples. And one other that I'd like to call out when we're talking about Aurora in particular is Lake City Way, and especially near 125th, because the history behind Lake City Way and when it was redesigned 25 years ago, about that money was supposed to be on Aurora for a redesign back in the early 2000s. That never came because of local business opposition. Faye Garneau and her business alliance pushed back, and SDOT said, okay, we'll use that money somewhere else. Shoreline ended up using that money. They redesigned Aurora, so you can see just north of the city border what happened in Shoreline. And then if you go over to Lake City Way, you can see a little bit of that money at play around 125th. And it's a nicer area. It's a business community now. It's the little downtown Lake City Way business area with a planted median. It looks nicer. So maybe not like the best example of a completely redesigned highway, Main Street highway, but it is an example of what could be done if you do invest the money. And to that point, a question I have, because we have been successful as a coalition here in the last few years, getting attention and money put towards Aurora. $50 million, notably in the Move Ahead Washington package, was earmarked for Aurora. We haven't seen that money appropriated yet. There's a number of reasons why. The state legislature wants to see the city commit to a vision. The city wants to do their planning process first, blah, blah, blah. But we do see also more money being put aside for Aurora in the recent city levy, the transportation levy that was passed, and also in the city budget last year or for this year. So there's a lot of money being put towards Aurora. We're going to use that. We're going to push for that money to be used most effectively to encourage a bold redesign of Aurora. My question for you, Kirk, is this transportation for safety, or sorry, this mega project for safety package, 1.5 billion, a lot of money spread out over 10 years. Okay, $150 million a year, not as much money, but still a very significant amount. And yet you showed that map, and I can't even count how many highways and how many miles of highway that would need to be addressed. What's the process for prioritizing which ones are going to be addressed first, and how much money would be spent on each? And I guess the question might be, selfishly, for those of us who live here on Aurora, when would we see some of that 1.5 billion over the next 10 years come back to Aurora so we can keep adding to the fund to improve Aurora Avenue North?
Well, Tom, it's a great question. I think you highlighted the thing we need to do first. We need to get that money appropriated. That we know how dangerous Aurora is, and we know that we need to, the more that we can get the money closer or appropriated closer to now, the faster the design process is going to go. And I think it's kind of fingers pointing at each other, one waiting for the other, one waiting for the other. And I think we just need to get that money appropriated. And luckily, we have great state representation here who believes in this. And so I think the more that we can do, of course, I'd love this group's support on the mega project for safety, but always just an email to your legislator to say, hey, this is in the budget. We want this now, rather than, in 2020, in the 2029, 2030 biennium, things like that. I think there's once again, 1.5 billion is not enough. It's definitely not enough to be able to address all these needs. And we're hoping this is just a start to be able to put that money, to put this line item in the budget so it can continue to be funded. Because we can see when things like this get in the budget and legislators and electeds start to take ownership of them, people want more money for it and they start calling for these improvements. One interesting model, we're a little bit agnostic in how the money goes out the door. We just want the money to be there. But one inspiring model for me is how we do community college capital investments. So for community colleges, it's not just peanut buttered out with a small amount every single year to every single roadway with a need. It's one large investment to each community college every, say, I believe it's like, let's use 10 years, for example. So every year, one community college gets a significant, massive influx of money to redesign something. And I think that could be a model for this. Maybe there is some division in the state, maybe by the WashDOT 6 regional divisions, where each division gets 150 million each year to redesign a roadway. And so that is a huge cataclysmic investment of money into one roadway. With it peanut buttered out every year, that's less than getting 150 million at once when you can really do big things. But our biggest ask is just for the money, to be put towards this urgent problem that we're seeing.
Thank you. Really interesting different models for how that might happen. I wonder if we can turn back to Carlo for a second. Carlo, I think you mentioned the Revive I-5 project and how it might have some impacts on traffic on Aurora. And I think mostly you were talking about the 24/7 bus lanes and the change in policy during that project for the bus lanes on Aurora. I'm wondering if you see any other changes to traffic on Aurora happening during Revive I-5, and if there are specific requests that you would have of coalition members or people who are using Aurora during that time because of the changes that will happen in traffic patterns.
Yeah, so the Revive I-5, in anticipation of that, SDOT believes that there will be more people using Aurora as their detour route to get to downtown, or using the E-line. King County Metro similarly has said they're anticipating ridership to go up, but as far as we understand, there isn't any. There won't, or King County Metro won't be running additional buses along Aurora, and the state isn't really doing anything to account or handle that traffic on Aurora. So with these things in mind, we're we kind of come to the conclusion that there will just be more people on Aurora using transit and using it to connect to other means of transit. So think like the North Gate Light Rail Station, potentially the 130th station when that eventually opens, and then getting to and from or across it via things like healthy streets and greenways for people biking and walking. Aurora doesn't have sidewalks in a large portion of it. Neither do many of the neighborhood streets that are adjacent to Aurora. So the problem starts to arise of we're going to have more people on one of the most dangerous roads in the city. What are we going to do to protect those people or to keep them safe? So nothing has really been put into place for that. The Aurora project team, SDOT, has said they want to do something to make the streets safer. As we're going through the budget process right now in the state, now would be a good time to ask your legislator to consider this in the upcoming budget in anticipation of I-5 closing. We'll also have the World Cup in, a year or so, and a lot of people are going to be we'll have a lot of people traveling from out of town that will be using our transit system. So we can do some things that will keep people safer, especially in those areas where there aren't sidewalks. We've seen the city do this with like the Green Lake Outer Loop, where they just use some Jersey barriers to make it safer for people on bikes to ride around Green Lake, take some of the cycling traffic off of the Green Lake path and put it closer to Aurora, but give people a safe way to do that. So there are some things we can do in the short term that can show how this can be made a little bit better without without investing tons of money into sidewalks, but achieving the same kinds of goals that sidewalks would have to keep people safe walking along Aurora. So I would encourage reaching out to your local legislator and asking for some funding or some budget to or consideration for some short-term fixes in anticipation of increased use of Aurora by pedestrians.
Thanks, Carlo. Yeah, and it looks like Henry's pointing out that during the Revive I-5 project, some of the lanes will be narrowing on I-5 that are still usable. So freight may have a hard time fitting in those lanes and may opt to use Aurora as well. So yeah, increased pedestrian and bike safety will be super important. Carlo, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I think ultimately the freight has to move, and freight is a lot more limited in how they can move about using the roadways. We're very heavily dependent on trucks for the last mile here. So getting people, as people are commuting in and out of town, commuters have more options when it comes to how they get to and from places. Freight does not. And so for the freight that will be using Aurora, that will just contribute to more traffic that is kind of unavoidable for some of that freight. So that means bigger vehicles on Aurora, narrower lanes on I-5, more congestion and more opportunities for things to go awry. So anything we can do to make it safer for all users of Aurora would be ideal.
Thank you. All right. Well, it seems like our stream of questions is getting a little bit thinner. So I think we're going to move towards closing this meeting out. But if there are people who have questions still, you're welcome to continue to ask them, put them in the chat. We will hang out for a little while and continue to try to answer any questions. We do have a happy hour coming up at Lantern Brewing on April 9th. And so we hope that you'll be able to come by there in the evening and chat with some of us and get any other questions or comments that you'd like to make heard. We always love to meet with our neighbors. So hope to see you there. And if you do have more questions, you're welcome to stay and ask them. But otherwise, thank you so much for being here tonight. It was great to be with all of you and to hear so many good ideas about what's happening and get to dream a little bit together about what's possible. So thank you all for being here, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, Kirk.
Thanks all. Have a great night.
Yeah,
You
thanks
too.
everyone for being here.
Thanks, everybody. This was great.
Yeah,
Thanks.
good to see you, Henry.
Hello. Yeah, it's really important that you all are doing this, and let me know if there's anything else that we can do. And I'll reach out to SDOT because my understanding is that sign that they're not taking those signs down. So
Yeah, we haven't heard anything about, oh, we're gonna maybe look at some places where they aren't appropriate. They're appropriate everywhere. So if the sign was there and it's not now, that's vandalism probably.
yeah, I know that when they were installing one of those, it was turned the wrong direction.
Oh,
Like it was at a 90-degree angle to where it was supposed to be. So it like looked like it was for Aurora, but just like on the wrong pole, instead of being for Northgate. So it could be that they're
maybe
just having
that's
issues with installation. Um,
northbound on Northgate would not be possible unless it was
unless it was turned 90
weirdly
degrees,
angled.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'll take a look because it could be that it's just they have had issues with the pole that it was supposed to be installed on. But yeah.
Cool. Thank you for that.
Yeah, of course. Have a great night, everybody.
You too.